Hey there, Janice. Thank you so much for joining me today for the Confident Sober Women podcast. I'm so excited to have you on the show and to have an amazing conversation that I know our audience is going to enjoy. So I'm going to turn the mic over to you and let you share a little bit more about your story, and then we're going to chat.
Okay, well, I'm very happy to be here and to share a little bit because I think the most important thing we do is to tell our stories and reduce stigma and reach out to others. But I am an author, speaker, retired social worker. I'm no longer actively in practice or coaching because I'm putting my time into writing and teaching. But I'm more importantly, I'm 12 years sober. I'm the mother of 4 kids. And despite being a social worker and thinking that I had some good self-help skills, I started drinking in my 40s and became, a full-blown alcoholic. So I'm one of those later in life drinkers, someone who avoid all the early warning signs of their alcoholism, denial, all of that, and started drinking anyhow. So my story, a little more, is I grew up in an alcoholic home. My dad was, your typical functioning alcoholic. Our family life wasn't horrible, but it definitely was confusing and dysfunctional, and there was no real guidance on how to deal with emotions or feelings, or it's a very authoritative household. So um, we never discussed my dad's drinking or the problems at home. So of course, what does a kid from that family do? We either grow up and have our own problems, we marry or get involved with partners who have problems, or we become workers in the helping professional. And that's what I did. So as a young person, I experimented with alcohol or drugs, but I already was so much a codependent and controlling person as a young person that I didn't like the effect of alcohol or drugs. Alcohol made me feel out of control. I only experimented with pot as a young person, and that made me feel paranoid. So that really wasn't my escape from, my emotional struggles at home or as a kid growing up. Instead, I had kind of a healthy escape in that I was an athlete, and it kept me out of trouble. So I, of course, was drawn to the helping professional, became a social worker, and stepped right into what I knew. And this is the crazy part of my story because I started out my career in alcoholism and addiction treatment, working as a family therapist, primarily in inpatient treatment centers. And at that point, I had some pretty good self-help skills and worked on myself. And I think I was on a path to some good self-care. But despite all that, like I said earlier, I still started drinking in my 40s, was in full-blown denial, and my drinking just accelerated. I believe in the genetic concept of drinking. Do you?
Um, yeah, yes, in some ways. I'm not a scientist, so
Right.
I think that first of all, by the way, thank you for sharing your story. Um, I, I I guess what I would say about it is I think that it's a very complex and nuanced, and I honestly think that we don't really know. I think sometimes we claim that we know. I think that it is a family disease, but I think it's also a family disease from just nurture and generational trauma. So, personally, as a trauma therapist, I and what we know now about the brain research on trauma and generational trauma specifically, that we know that that gets passed down through the mother into the womb, even, and then in our DNA. So yes, is
Mhm.
there an addiction gene, like we can name it? No, I don't think that they've discovered that. I don't know that they will. I think what we mean by saying it's genetic is it is a part of our DNA composure, mostly
Mhm.
from generational trauma.
Yeah, and I agree with all that. And I look back in my family history, both of my parents came from families that had alcoholism in it, so I feel like if nothing else, behaviorally, I'm predisposed to it socially, but I do feel like there is, probably a link physiologically. So, yeah. However, despite that, again, I started drinking, and at first it started out very slow. It built throughout my 40s until I feel like I tipped the scales and became a full-blown alcoholic, had to go to treatment. So now I want to back up and say a little bit. So early on, I had some good self-help skills, self-care skills. But as I was having kids and in my 30s, I found that, and I think this is real common, and that's one of the reasons why I love the topic of the concept of your podcast, because it's about women and moms. Because personally, I felt like in my 30s, when I was pregnant, having children, trying to manage a career, that I really struggled, and that also fueled my feelings of poor self-esteem. It triggered all those childhood issues of feeling like I was never going to be good enough. I could never get enough stuff done. And that fueled the drinking too. I'm not explaining the drinking, but I just want to point that out because I think I'm not the only one. I think there's a lot of women out there who struggle with balancing home life, family life, and taking care of themselves. So, and that's one of the reasons why, drink is a quick fix to all of that. It is a quick way to reduce stress and distract from the drudgery at times or the stress at times. But my drinking advanced. I felt a lot of guilt and shame towards the end of my drinking because of being a social worker. At that point in my life, I was not working actively professionally in the social work field. I was involved in more volunteer activities. So I didn't have any real people judging me or looking at, accountability in that respect. But I put that on myself. I mean, the guilt and shame I had because one of my motivations for going into social work was to help break the generational cycles of trauma. I mean, I told myself early on, I'm not going to do to my kids what my parents did to me. I'm not going to put them in that same situation, and I absolutely did towards the end of my drinking. And then the big part of my story, the part that I'm most passionate sharing about, is that even in early recovery, when I was working on my recovery really hard, I was still hurting my relationships with my family because I, in a very fundamental way, you could say, transferred my addiction from alcohol to recovery. I put so much time and energy into recovery that I distanced myself from my family and my kids. And I didn't, they were just as confused by my lack of presence and my emotional distance from this new sober Janice as they were by the drinking Janice. And that caused a lot of problems. So,
So when you say you became addicted to your recovery, what were you using, like a program or a course
mhm.
or some kind of how did you get to?
Okay, yeah, great. And I know that you talked about AA and you have a pretty positive attitude towards it, right? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I went to an inpatient treatment program. It was really kind of 12-step based, but it is a professional program. But it does have that fundamental, like, this is a great support system. We want you to get connected with this. It's a great relapse prevention tool. And the programs I had been working with as a young person were 12-step based, and I had been involved in Al-Anon and ACA when I first graduated college and was working in the field. So I was very familiar with all of that, and I embraced that. There goes the dog. Geez. Let's see if she stops. What if I have to pause and put her away? I'll just keep talking and we'll wing it. So I went to treatment thinking that I knew. Do we want to pause and let me put the dog out?
I can't even hear it.
Okay, fine. So I went to treatment thinking that I was going to go for 4 weeks, the typical general treatment program. But when I got there, and the treatment program was about 4 hours away from my home, 4.5 hours. So it made it hard for my family to get involved in my treatment program. But when I got there and really started embracing treatment and opening up and disclosing things I'd never talked about before, some grief, some childhood sexual abuse, an adult sexual assault, I ended up extending my stay from 4 weeks to 12 weeks. And while I was really working on myself and embracing that, I wasn't working on the family issues at home. And emotionally, I was distancing myself from them. And I know one of my core childhood issues is fear of abandonment and rejection. And being that I had invested so much time and energy in my 30s, reinforcing my identity and self-esteem as a mom, now it's been taken away from me. I projected my fear of rejection from others onto my kids. And I kind of built a wall between me and my family. So that by the time I finished treatment, I shared this last week. By the time I finished treatment, there was some really angry, hostile feelings from a couple members of my family who, let me back up. The treatment center was very individual focused and offered a family program, but that was not the primary. Families were not involved very much. And because of them being so far, it was not easy for them to get involved in any kind of family treatment. So their interactions with my counselors and stuff was kind of conflictual, to put it in a nice way. And by the time I was ending the last of that treatment, they're like, we think you should go to a halfway house. We think that your home life is not going to be conducive to staying sober. So I went from treatment to a halfway house. Now, the good part about this, the thing I'm passionate about is that, so I had 12 weeks of inpatient treatment. I did 3 or 4 months in a halfway house and then another year in like a 3/4 way sober living house, which has given me a phenomenal foundation for my sobriety. I am no judgment against anyone who has relapsed, but I feel like that's probably the number one reasons why I've endured a lot of losses in sobriety without relapsing. Does that make sense? So the good part of all of that is that I got a really good foundation to my sobriety. The bad part of that is that for this first 6 months, I distanced myself from my kids and my family. And we made no progress on our relationship. And if you were to talk to my daughter, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but she's the most vocal about it. And she'll say that it was just as bad as like the last few years of my drinking. So to make a long story short, when I finally woke up, got to the other side of that and saw that I had repeated the same patterns that I had helped people with 30 years before when I was a family therapist in inpatient treatment, and that the women I lived with at the halfway house and my sober living, my peers and sober, a lot of us had this distance between our family members. I mean, and to this day, some of them still haven't repaired some of their relationships. So when I got to the other side of that, the first thing I did was work on my family, on those relationships and try to repair them and rebuild them because it was heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. Early sobriety is rough enough. And then to be like your family to not want to be with you is painful. So I started taking those risks, fear of rejection, getting used to rejection, making mistakes, going back to the books because I'm a student at heart, a student and teacher at heart, which again, that's the crazy thing. Here I am. I know this stuff, but it's tough to apply it to yourself. So, but
Yeah. How
it
old
kind
were
of,
your kids when you went to treatment?
they ranged from 13 to 21.
Oh,
So
okay.
8th grade, 10th grade, and 2 kids in college.
Yeah, so
So
kind of critical time, really, in that adolescence period. There's a lot going on anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So they had known you as like this kind of drinking mom, with
Mm-hmm.
alcoholic addiction lifestyle, and then you went to treatment. I don't want to you to say any more than you are comfortable with completely,
Uh-huh.
but I'm curious if there's a way, in a general way, or whatever you want. If you could just very quickly share a little bit more about what they were saying to you, um, when you were behaving, like what were the issues with you from them
And
after your treatment? Why did they not want to be close to you?
essentially I was still abandoning them. I was still emotionally unavailable. And okay, to go back to some of my core issues, growing up in my family, my role was the mascot, the cute one, the superficial, make everyone happy. And so those early interactions in the first few months of my kids were all me being superficial. And like, I think we had at the most 2 visits in those 12 weeks to my treatment at my treatment center. And halfway through one of them, because I was like, oh, talking about the treatment facility. I was talking about the weather. I talked about this big storm we had where the power had been out for a couple of days. And like halfway through this visit, my daughter like stops everything and is like, I don't care about this stuff. I want to know how you are doing. Are you making changes? And
Oh, okay, so let me see if I'm getting this. So I was just trying to get a little bit of a deeper understanding because I think
uh-huh.
it's pertinent and really, I think relatable probably to our listeners. So when they visited you, which I get it was a little far away, so you didn't have visits. I assume maybe you had phone calls or something. When they did that, you were only talking about yourself. Is that what
Mm-hmm.
they're saying?
Right,
Okay.
right.
So they were picking up from you that you weren't like asking how was school or what's going on at home or how's the doll, like whatever, how's your friend, that you weren't asking them or engaging them about things about their life. Is that what you're
Well,
saying?
I was engaging a little bit, but on a superficial level, not really asking about how they're doing.
Hmm. Okay.
Um, and I do think that our family fell into that where they were embarrassed and they felt really isolated and alone because they couldn't share with their friends and family, I mean, their friends and schoolmates about what was going on. So I felt like they were looking for more when they came to see me. And I was so fearful that I couldn't offer any real in-depth authenticity. I was fake. I was still acting fake in front of them. And my daughter called me out on it. That's the best way to put it. So,
Okay,
and I,
so it sounds like they were looking for, or from what you know, they were looking for a little bit more of an emotional connection from you, meaning like they were looking for you to care about their feelings and like how you
right.
impacted them. Okay.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
And to start the apology process and
Oh, yeah.
ask them about what they were feeling. And frankly, at that time, well, I was still too afraid of what they might tell me. I mean, I started treatment thinking what I did wasn't that bad, not recognizing what had happened during blackouts or that their impression of what was that bad is very valid.
Right. Well, that's the reason why I think it sounds like you use the 12-step program to be sober. Is that true or not?
Yes, I definitely used it to be sober.
Okay, so I mean, there's a reason why the steps are numbered for a reason. You know, I mean, there's a reason why they're numbered for like because when you're 1 month sober, or 12 weeks, or 6 months, even, or sometimes, like you're not prepared, emotionally or
Mhm.
with the correct mindset to go to anybody with any kind of amends. Now, sometimes we can do sort of like an initial one, like, oh my gosh, I'm just like so sorry how like how this is going, but to do it like a formal, like I'm from the bottom of my heart recognizing my part in this situation, like we're not prepared to do that for a long time. It needs to be a lot of work. And so I think our family members are looking for something, right?
Right.
They want to hear at least a little bit of something. They want to hear some accountability. And
Mhm.
so usually whatever we can offer at that time is the best we can do at that time. So like to give some grace to you and to any of us who have done this journey, when you're at that point, you can only give what you got, right? So if
Right.
you're trying to say to them like, look, I totally get it. Like, this must suck for you, like, to not have your mom at home, you know,
Mhm.
like that's all you can do at that time, you know? And then, and also young people, um, don't understand that either because they're developing brains, you know, like also not emotionally mature enough to like sort of understand, and they also by nature and adult and developmental stage completely self-centered. So
Right.
um you know what I mean? So it's an interesting dynamic that you had there with dealing with people who are naturally completely self-centered, also
Hmm.
somebody who is also naturally completely self-centered because of addiction, right? Trying to
Hmm.
heal and get right. It just seemed like a perfect storm, maybe, you know?
It is. It really is. I just really tried to assume as much responsibility for my part as possible, because I believe, and looking back now and in the research and interviews I've done, I think there's ways we could have improved upon it, things that could have made it better, which is what kind of became my mission early on. So in early sobriety, I'd volunteer and go back to my treatment facility. And I was always like, please reach out to your kids, even if it's just a letter, make those calls, just trying to plant that seed that we need to give our family members hope that it's not going to be a quick switch. We're not going to flip a switch and be normal again and be that mom that we were. Because for the first 10 years of I have two kids, a break and two kids, and the older two kids will say, they lived with me for 10 years without drinking when I was in my like super overachieving mom status, volunteer queen and part-time social worker. And so they reflect back on that. I was like, you were a good mom once. But God, where was I going with that? So they did have some experience with healthy parenting, and whereas the younger two did not. The younger two just always knew me drinking. Different experiences, which is another big point that I try to press is each child's different. And as you mentioned, different developmental stages. That 13-year-old was at a pivotal point in his life, going from 8th grade to 9th grade, changes going on in his body, grew like 6 inches the year that I was away.
Right.
And my oldest child was graduating college and trying to navigate real
Right.
life, so they were at
I mean, it's a
really,
lot. It's a lot to manage. I mean, obviously you have four children and that's already just kind of a lot. And just, to manage, just,
yeah,
parenting them, all of the things, paying for them, and then you throw in just the significantly different developmental stages, and it's just a lot to manage, and when you're not well, when you're not your best self, if you're living in active addiction, it's going to be really difficult to kind of meet all of those people at their level of need at any given
yeah,
time. It doesn't mean that you're not like doing a good job or you're not a good mom. It just means that, wow, like this is just a challenge. And then you throw on your own challenge, which was, is significant. Plus I think you're married at the time, right? And
right,
so,
right.
marriage, anything else if you're working, if you have parents or family members who need your help, or God forbid you have like friends or a life. I mean, there's just like a lot going on. So
Yes,
we're never doing anything in a bubble. Like we're not ever just doing parenting like one thing,
right.
like all of this other stuff going on. And I think as women, kind of as you alluded to before, we do take on, just naturally, many of us do take on like a lot of the burden of that as the primary caregivers. And then again, like layering on all those other things. And so, yes, when we aren't well, I don't care what kind of self care you have in place. If you're not emotionally well, spiritually fit, if you haven't done your own therapy, if you're still having negative beliefs kind of like running in the background constantly, you're not,
Mm.
it's going to be very difficult for you to manage those things, period, let alone do it really well.
Right, right. It's a balance. It's
Yeah.
really, really a
Yeah.
tough balance to balance and that's where I say, like, uh, I felt like I invested all my energy into my recovery and not enough of a balance back into the family.
So I would love for you to say more about that part. Okay, so
Okay.
I would specifically love to hear a little bit because so the experience that I had personally and where I love to meet women along the road, and what I hear from most of my guests is, early sobriety, we all kind of know, is very challenging, and it has its own. I always say about like special needs, right? It's its
Hmm.
own sort of section where you're just going through so much. You're going through a lot of physical change. You're like, you might have like family problems. There might be legal issues that are going on. You're dealing
Mhm.
with trauma. Like, and so you're just trying to learn how to live life, you know, without drinking
Right.
help you. And that is very difficult and usually does last 6 to 12 months, some, and then often more. But after that first year, I find, and many of the people I talk to, that we kind of have this, like an awakening happen, right? You're like, oh wow, I feel really good. You know, like we are
Uh,
sober as we're ever going to be. Physically, we generally can have solved some problems. We feel better. We're starting to get it a little, and then the world kind of opens up to us. Like, oh wow, like I can I could have
yeah.
dreams. I can like write a book. I've always wanted to start a business or do whatever. And we have opportunities now that just didn't seem possible or accessible to us when
Mhm.
we were in active addiction. So then that starts to come in, right? And then also this other piece around, as we continue through that, kind of rebuilding the relationships in our life, which is kind of like your main focus in your work, and then also
Mhm.
the biggest part of your story, right? So I'm curious
Right.
if you can think about like kind of that like after that first year period, but like in that like 2 to 5 and beyond years when you were working a recovery program and kind of doing things, like what did you, if that was still happening, if you felt like you were too much involved with your recovery, not enough involved with your family, and if so, like in that time range, what do you mean? Like, can you paint the picture for us?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I would say like about 6 months sober, that's when I kind of woke up and went, oh my God, I've continued to alienate my family. So I started, I mean, I was living away from home. So I started going home more often, um, making phone calls instead of letters, things like that. But I mean, I think the most important thing that we do to help repair relationships, which no one really sees at first, is that we have to stay sober or be working on our recovery. So during that time, I mean, I still work on my recovery very diligently. I have lost too many friends and seen too many friends relapse without when you get complacent or overly confident. So during that first period, I really continued to work on the program, but I made more of an effort to include them, invite them. They, thankfully, my ex-husband was great and got them into some therapy, you know, as soon as I went to treatment, which was helpful. Um, but I just started talking to them more, telling them more. I made a few mistakes and I would sometimes overshare or make the expectation like they'd be excited for me. Like, you want to come to my 1 year chip ceremony? They'd be like, no. And so I would have to, and I took it to therapy too. I'd have to realize that's not personal. It's not them not supporting me. It's they need more time. You know, they're still not trusting. So what I did was work on my program, work on my internal struggles. I had avoided went back to working on my ACA, my childhood issues with my therapist. Um, and started taking risks and involving them. I did do some family therapy with my kids, with their therapist, but I think you need, here's one of my philosophies that could be controversial. It's hard to do family therapy with the therapist who's seeing your child individually or your husband individually. I feel pretty strongly you need an objective third therapist or coach. I don't know how you feel about that, but yeah. So so we did some family therapy. It wasn't really successful, but we just kept trying and I got involved. I learned to listen to them more. One of my favorite stories is, and one of my first signs that my kids were making a step towards me was when my child, who was my third child, middle son, asked me, and this is like a year and a half into sobriety, if I would take him on his college trip tours. And this is a simple thing, but it's all these little things that help build relationships. So I I mean, I literally talked to my sponsor, my therapist, like, I'm going to be in this car and sharing a hotel room with this kid for 2, maybe 3 days. That's a challenge, for a lot of people, even the best of situations. So I got coaching and support and help and advice from my peers because, again, even though you're been the therapist, you don't always take your own medicine. So I practiced every skill I could. I took advantage of those little moments, and that went a long way. I mean, I learned to sit quietly for hours at a time, not ramble, not talk too much about myself, gently ask questions, take advantage of those little moments where you go, I wish you'd been at that soccer game where I scored 3 goals, for me to be able to go, yeah, I wish I'd been there too. And offer a little apology or a little amends. It came organically. So it's
Mm,
kind of hard to explain like what I did because it was taking advantage of those little moments, especially with boys. My social work hat goes, mothers and boys talk differently than mothers and daughters. And maybe that's sexist, but I do think there's different ways to interact with boys to get them to talk more and more active. And yeah, that's a whole nother ball game. But so
totally agree. Yeah.
I hope there's some wisdom in that. I tend to ramble
So
on.
I'm curious about, so thank you so much for sharing again about, and I know it's hard sometimes when we get like into the nitty gritty personal, and that's why I don't want
No.
anybody to feel uncomfortable, but sometimes it's helpful just even in a general way to have other people share these personal parts in like a general way so that they can be like, oh, okay, I can see how that this is happening in my house, or
Mhm.
like, and just so some of the things that you said too that were super that stand out to me is like you were persistent, like you guys just didn't give up,
Mhm.
you kept trying. Oh, you tried the family therapy. Yes, family therapy is extremely difficult. It's very difficult to sit in the room with everybody and have people saying mean things or telling their truth, and you have to take it, and it's very painful at times, or having the therapist say like, hey, why don't you try to do this, or you need to be doing this, and you're like, oh, sometimes we have that little tantrum. I don't want to do that. I'm the mom, I'm the
Mhm.
adult. So there's a lot of like kind of breaking down of some of that stuff that happens in that process, but what I liked and what I heard was persistence, like you didn't give up. And
Mhm.
so I think when families are like that, and especially in parenting or any relationship, when you're just committed to the thing, when you're committed to the thing, like even in marriage, how like you said ex, so I guess you're not
Mhm.
married, but you know how it is though. Like it's very very challenging, and it's like sometimes the easier, softer way does feel like let's just end this, but but when you have a couple that is saying, okay, well, we really both love each other. Somehow we loved each other at one point. We have these kids. We're committed. We have zero clue how to do it. We're not doing well. Like, and then they get the help, but then they just keep trying different things.
Right.
They just don't give up. I mean, those are the things. Just like business ownership, right? I mean, entrepreneurship. Like, what do they say? It takes 7 to 10 years for sometimes things to take off. So, like, the ones that are successful in certain areas of entrepreneurship are they're only that way because they didn't give up. They just didn't
Right.
stop trying because everybody else along the path was like, well, it's been 4 years and I haven't been successful. So that's what I heard you say that with your kids, and I love that. And I think that's the message. And then another thing that I heard you say too was just um, two things was just listening, just like taking an active approach to listening.
Mhm.
I think one of the things with parenting young people, especially my kids are 21, 20, and 17, so like we're right in the thick of it, but even before this, is really just learning, and being a therapist does help a lot, and
Mhm.
also a recovery background, but we're still parent, like I'm still the mom and I'm also human. But
Yeah.
I think learning how to just listen and receive what they're saying, even when it's the most wild thing you've ever
Yes.
heard in your life, is one of the best skills in parenting. Like not reacting to like the thing that they say, and you're just like, oh my gosh. Like, I mean, I've had that moment where I was standing in the kitchen and one of my kids said something, and I was just like, wow, like that's not how you were raised at all. Like, I don't
Uh-huh.
like how could, and I just had to kind of listen and like, okay, oh, you think that, oh, okay, because what is the reaction going to do? if I go crazy and I have a big, wow, like, well, how could you say that? You know, like all she's going to hear is, oh, okay, it's not okay for me to talk like that. It's not okay for me to bring things like that up to mom because she's going to freak out.
Uh,
Right. So that just
right.
them, it's not okay for me to be honest about how I'm feeling right now because there's going to be a big reaction or consequence. So I
Yeah.
really like that you were sharing that. And then the last part was the validation piece that you were able to like really validate. And that's what I always say in my work and probably yours too. Like most people in life really just want to be heard, seen, and validated.
Yeah.
That's all any humans ever really want. Most of us. That's all therapy is.
Right.
Listening, hearing them, and then just literally validating, like totally get it. Like, man, that sucks. You know,
Mhm.
because sometimes people have no one in their life that can do that for them or has ever. You know, and so
Right.
when someone shows up like a mom and you're like, yeah, I that sucks that I missed that game. You're right. I totally wish I was there
Mhm.
too.
Yeah.
That's all they want to hear. It's very repairing.
It is. I agree. I think validation and good listening skills is crucial.
So when you're working with people now in your practice, I know that's what pretty much your specialty, just to kind of end with some really good stuff here. Like when
Mhm.
you work with your clients and they come to you on some of the family stuff, like what are some of like the top three things? Like where do you start when someone's like in like they're past the early recovery stuff. We're not doing that. Like they're in family, but they're like having crisis or relationship issues. Where do you start with them? Like just give us some of like the top things that maybe we could walk away right now and start using in our own lives.
Well, I think accountability is huge. Taking ownership, validating another person's opinion and values, impression, because myself and my child could have experience the same exact event and perceive it differently. And it may be something I'm easy to brush off, but for them, it's heartbreaking. So I have to validate their experience. Being a good listener. I think because I'm not in private practice right now, I'm really just speaking and talking and working with other practitioners and trying to increase awareness about how family treatment can be involved, families can be involved in treatment earlier. So I think it's also just those early steps of communication and a little bit like we will get there, inspiring some hope. Um, yeah, and not to give up. That's crucial. I mean, it breaks my heart, and this happens at least once a month where I'm in a meeting and someone's, shares that, they haven't talked to their 4 years, 5 years, 6 years sober, but haven't talked to their family members for 10 years. And they've stopped trying. And, I, if it's a family worth re-engaging, I want to help people heal that loss or try and address it, find the balance. So balance, oh my God, that's probably my key message is balance. You've got to have balance in all aspects of your recovery, social, physical, spiritual, emotional, mental. And I think, don't you have like 4 tenets in your practice too?
Yeah, I have like the pillars of my work, which just
Right.
guide my work with people too. And but what I think what you said is so important, and it really just kind of lays out the essentials, right? The
Mhm.
essentials of good healthy relationships. And I think if we could all kind of grab onto those and explore them a little bit individually and then with our people, it would really make the world a whole different place, right? Because
Yeah.
we can learn to create space for just people's differences or, people like create space for people's um, ways of viewing the world or, and not have to be right or not have to make it right. Like
Mhm.
that's a huge part of our societal, I think, problems these days. And what causes a lot of conflict is people really get latched on to like, well, but I was right. And I'm like, well, I mean, maybe you were right for you and like you
Yeah.
believe that and that's fine. Like you believe that, but that other person doesn't. And so that can destroy relationships right there. Like we watched it happen, I think, in our society, and it's a shame because it just doesn't have to, And I think also part of it is like, especially in parenting, this shows up, but also in all of these areas. If you have a child that maybe isn't completely aligned with like the way you think or your values, which is by the way their job, right? Their job is to
Right.
individuate, from us and take what they want and leave the rest, and then discover their own values that are separate from their parents. That's the task of adolescence, right? So then they're in adulthood thinking like, oh, even though my parents were, they really valued education. Like they just, they put all their time and money in education, and I appreciate that, but I really value like just adventure. I'm kind of into like travel. I want to discover stuff. I'm a creative, but if you have that kind of unalignment, it doesn't make one bad or wrong. It's just different. And so I think as the parent being able to say like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. I can't really relate to that. Like I don't get it, because I just don't get why you would want to do this or but
Mhm.
being able to like see it and then not have the need and desire to like want to convince them to come your way. I think that is
Yeah,
the big emotional maturity part of healthy relationships, right?
yeah,
It's not our job to convince anybody of anything.
yeah, I
So
agree.
I thank you so much for your time. I know you wrote a book. Maybe you could share the title or to get it. How do people get a hold of you and find you if they want to reach out?
Okay, so the book is called Rebuilding Relationships in Recovery. It's available everywhere. It's under my name, Janice V. Johnson Dowd. I have a website, janicejonsondowd.com, and my main Instagram site is parenting underscore the word IN underscore recovery. It's not just parenting on there too, because it's also a lot of recovery information, motivational, inspirational. Um, but I really enjoy it. And probably the other thing I want to say is let's expand the recovery community. I think it's really important. That might be one of the messages I missed a second ago, is that this disease can be very isolating. Families can feel very isolated. Let's reach out, because I feel stronger when I surround myself with people with similar needs and interest and support.
Yeah, I totally, that's a whole nother episode we could spend
Yeah.
time on. And I agree. And, I think anybody you talk to now is connected to the recovery community in some way. You either are one, you're married to one, you were raised by one, you're raising one, you know
Uh-huh.
no matter where you are or where you live, you're exposed to it. And so I agree. Like when we spread our message of hope, when we talk about real things and about emotional maturity, we do expand our recovery community into the little pockets of society that really need to hear that, and that really need to hear um, how to build those healthy relationships, how to rebridge the gaps, right? And even though there's so much hurt there, there's hurt and pain and struggle, there is opportunity for repair. If people are willing to do that. Obviously there are some situations that are just very toxic and tragic and completely abusive and not acceptable.
Right, right,
About that, but I would say most people are not in that category.
right,
So
right.
anyway, well, thank you for your time. Thank you for your details, and I'll make sure I link them to the show notes below. And I hope you have a fantastic day.
Same to you.